I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Finance Committee. I'd just like to start with karakia. Haki woto, haki waho, kia tau te mauna e. Ko kiri nei, ina piki, mina hiki. Ko te rangamari e tātou. E rapo nei, te he mori ora. Breathe in, breathe out, settle the emotions that stir inside of us through the ups and the downs. It is peace that we seek. And behold, there's life. That's the Te He Māori Ora. Welcome, everybody. I don't think we've got any apologies for this meeting. Don't seem to have any. And we also have no public forum that I'm aware of. Is there anything on the agenda that anyone has any addition to or any comments? If not, we'll take the agenda as set. And just want to ask if there's any conflicts of interest on any item in this meeting. Okay, that's good. We can then progress to the confirmation of the minutes that are there in the report. Could I have somebody who would like to move these? Thank you, Kate. Seconder. Gretchen, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at the quarterly report for the year ending 30th of June 2023. Sarah and Nick, Mike, who's not involved.
Come for sakes, Chris.
Right, so we are in your hands. Finance is a bit of a special subject, and I'm not saying that science isn't, but I think that you can assume that the reports have been read, but I don't think you should assume that everything is understood in terms of the financial information that's there. So it would be good if you can address the report and highlight anything that you think should be noted by councillors.
I'll kick off. Just if you go to the first report, the cover report is just obviously it's just the cover report saying these are the reports, the financial reports that you've got attached, and you've got the finance ones up front, the statement of comprehensive revenue and expense, financial position or balance sheet, and then flow through. The final one is the draft statement of service performance, which are all the measures and targets that will end up in the annual report. But if you, so Sarah and Mike can sort of step you through any of the specifics or questions. But if you look at the statement of comprehensive revenue and expense as the first report, which is on page 8, the key thing to note there is the operating surplus and deficit. And you can see there the actual result is a deficit of 5.1 million. So that's just under 1.9 million worse than the deficit we had in the annual plan. So if you recall the previous quarterly reports, and if you go back to the first one back where we forecast back in sort of November last year, I think when we were in Cromwell, and we highlighted that we were actually expecting at that point with various things happening that the deficit was potentially going to be about $4 million worse than planned. And then subsequent quarterly reports, when we've reforecast, it dropped down to the last one that you got. We were saying we thought with a few things that hadn't panned out as badly as we'd expected, or the revenues we'd received through PT and various things were better than we expected. We were forecasting 2.5 million worse variance. So the result, the draft result as it is there now is better than that at 1.9. So yeah, on the one hand, while it is worse than we'd budgeted originally when we set the annual plan, it is better than we had been forecasting and expecting through the year. So that's the positive. Sarah will be able to take you through sort of the variances that have made that up. The only other thing that I'd sort of point out is below the operating surplus or deficit, there's still some numbers to come there that will be entered and flow through into the actual annual report. They are non-cash. It's valuations of our investment properties and valuation of the port itself. So those are still to come. And the next step of all of this is that it gets finalised. The auditors are looking at this now. They've started their audit, and then we take this through to the Audit and Risk Committee next month on the 21st of September. And that will include obviously those final adjustments that aren't in this draft position that you're seeing currently.
That's great, Nick. I just wanted to note that the last time we had a forecast was 31st of May, and you were forecasting a $5.8 million deficit. So there's an improvement there of over $700,000. So there's been some good financial management, whatever, we've gone into that. So well done. Yeah, so you want to step us through this?
Yes, I just want to highlight to you, I've actually made a very small typing mistake in other expenses. So just to give you, yeah, so sorry, I do apologise for that. It should be 72987. So these are made in Excel and then I literally type them into Word. So I'm not the best typist, so I do really apologise for that. Going forward, we are actually going to put these into Keystone so that you will not have my terrible typing, which I apologise for. It will just pick it up straight from Excel, so that won't be happening in the future. The main thing, if I look through, you'll see in the description of note 1 and 2 in relation to subsidies and grant revenue and other income. We've got a switch there, which has happened in relation to how central government has funded the transport. So in the part, we budgeted for that to come through as fare revenue, and obviously with the 50% subsidy, that was being funded by Waka Kotahi. So that came through as grant revenue instead of fare revenue. That is what is causing most of the variances in that line. There are some other items which I have detailed down in the bullet points, which is just below budgeted revenue. There's also part of that is the Lawa project, which I have highlighted in previous quarter reports. The Lawa project was budgeted when we made our annual plan to be run and managed by Otago Regional Council, but that has now been managed by Regional Service Holding Limited. So obviously we didn't get the revenue, we equally don't have those expenses. So if I go through to the interest in investment income, that is the vast majority of that variance is actually the Port Otago interest. So we have that sitting as revenue, and we also have it sitting down in finance costs. So in the budget, we didn't have that in our statement of comprehensive revenue expenses, but we need to put in the revenue line and the expenditure line. So you will see that that's, most of that is offset in the finance cost. Do we have any, are you happy for me to move on from revenue and move into expenses?
If there's any questions around the revenue side of things, I mean, we're talking about positive variances there in terms of subsidies and grants. So we got more money coming in than we anticipated. The negative variance that we see, and also you've explained the interest section of the variance there, but the other income, which is you've got covered in note 2, is a deficit income. Do you just want to cover off that?
Sure. So some of that other income deficit is being caused by, that's where fare revenue sits for transport. Yeah. So some of that is being caused by transport. So you'll see I do have a bullet point for Dunedin. So, and then Wakatipu, explaining those two figures. So that's 1.2 million and 575,000. We then also do have some variances just in relation to consent processing, which we process less consents than budgeted, that revenue is lower. And compliance monitoring is also lower than budgeted revenue. And obviously there's 353,000, which is lower. And the rest of it is really over quite a few activities at council. You will see I've given you the detailed activity table where it explains if the revenue was had a greater variance than 100,000, and that is done at the program level, so you can see that at each of the individual programs.
Okay, so overall we had actual income of 105 million 583. The plan was 100,069, so we've got an overall positive variance in our revenue of 5.514. So yeah, just scroll down into the expenditures if you'd like. Any questions here, Kevin?
Yeah, just it's probably more to Richard, I think, under the consent processing with 900,000 under budget for revenue. That seems to be a trend that we're having quite regularly. And I know it must be difficult to budget that, and I just wonder if we are having to have a balanced budget.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that figure needs to be looked at.
So there was an issue with the way the budget was built last year. We flagged where there were 3 full FTE science staff put into that budget, and they were supposed to. This is not a criticism of them; they've had other priorities. But the way the budget was built, which has been changed now, because in my view they should never have sat there. They should have sat in science.
Yep.
So that revenue that was supposed to be generated with science working on consent was never realised. So that's a significant chunk of that, and won't appear this year.
Yep.
There is still remains an issue where we have consent staff doing more engagement type work and education work, and I know Joe and Alex have been doing some work on this year's budget just to better align the expectations around what we do. We had a significant amount of winter grazing engagement last year that meant they weren't necessarily generating revenue. So I would expect that number to decrease, first of all, because those science FTEs aren't there anymore.
Yep.
And then also just with better building of the budget and expectation around what those staff will spend their year on.
Yep.
And then the compliance monitoring and performance monitoring is an issue between the revenue and financing policy and the percentage of staff time that is allocated to revenue, but we fixed fee that work, and those two figures don't match. So we still have some work to do to get that tidied up, so that the fixed fee, we almost know the revenue we're going to get before the year starts. So we should be able to accurately budget for that.
And just further on that consent revenue, it assumes that you're going to be fully staffed at your FTE for that whole year and get that 60% cost recoverable time. But in a perfect world, that doesn't quite happen. So of the team that we had in the office, they were all doing up near their individual 60% cost recovery. So it's not that they're not doing the work and not charging the work, there's just some assumptions there in the budgets that haven't assisted.
So there's an offset and reduced staff costs for some of that revenue as well.
Yeah, and look, my comment's not around, I certainly don't want to put any lid on the education and the engagement stuff that we're doing, because we're getting, I believe we're getting exceptionally good results from that. It's just more that
we're just going to budget better to reflect what we think we're going to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions?
So I'll move on to the expenditure section. So employee benefits expense, that is lower than budgeted by 4.2 million. You will see that I've included a table of the employee FTE. So we had budgeted FTE of 334, but we've only actually got at Q4 291. And that figure has been reasonably consistent since Q2. So in Q1 we had 254, Q2 was 289, and then we've had 291 for Q3 and 4, although there's been a little bit of movement in the directorate, some up and downs. So that below budgeted employee benefits expense is just a reflection of the fact that we do not have the budgeted staff hours, budgeted staff that we expected.
In terms of the new budget for the new year through to June 24, what is the staff target in terms of full-time equivalents in that budget? Is it this figure carried through of 334?
I think there's actually a little bit of an uplift from the 334, but the employees are phased. So in some areas we do phasing where we realise that they're not going to be hired straight away. But it's very difficult to phase employees at the moment. It's a really difficult labour market. Sometimes we'll go out to market and replace somebody, and unfortunately somebody else will leave just because it's such a competitive market at the moment. So it is a difficult area to budget and phase at the moment.
So the total FTE for the budget is it 334? Forget about phasing.
After this, I'll check the number
Yeah,
once
okay,
I'm back at my
thanks.
computer, and I'll
Yep.
email it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. All right, carry on.
Sorry, depreciation and amortization is just the depreciation on our property, plant and equipment. We do have a little bit of a drop in property, plant and equipment compared to budget. It's just based on timing and phasing and ordering of things. Most of our property, plant and equipment is vehicles, which is the capital replacement. There's quite a delay at the moment on actually being able to physically keep those vehicles from an order to actual delivery phase. The finance costs I have explained, that is the expenditure side of the income, which is sitting up in the revenue line. And then we've got other expenses. So the variance in other expenses has mostly been caused by spending on external resource for those lack of FTEs. So we've had some increased legal costs in relation to things that we didn't expect to budget. So there's the RPS. There's also been a little bit of legal increase in relation to compliance. However, I'm sure that you've reported back the fines that were received with that. So that obviously has a cost element. The cost element to that went into the 22-23 period, but the revenue due to the timing of the judgment date will be going into the 23-24 period. So some of that is a little bit of that offset that you see. There's been increased expenditure on bus contractors, which is due to the bus driver wages. So you have already had that detailed to you in various papers. So, and there is also, I just want to draw your attention to the biosecurity welding pine. So we make an expectation in the annual plan of when our grant funding would be from MPI. We don't know that when we set our budget. And in this year, there was additional funding that was received above what we budgeted. So it's just we have to make our best guess based on the indications from central government for that in the budget, and unfortunately it doesn't always line up.
Okay, any questions, Brian?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around, we employee benefit expenses were 4.2 million below budget, and then in terms of external resources due to staff vacancies, we had the additional cost of 3.7. Now 3.7 is obviously less than 4.2. So I'm actually sort of feeling happy about that. And it's a good sort of context for any criticism, I think, in relation to external resources. But I'm also just trying to understand, one of the reasons, are we comparing like with like? The fact that we started off at 254, went up to 291, and Tim, you said 334. Is it a good news story, or is it because we haven't really achieved some of the outcomes, as a consequence that we haven't achieved some of the outcomes that we should have achieved? But I think my real question is, once the staffing numbers becomes a bit more stable, where's that going to sit? Or is the external resources sort of that true cost being hidden in that context?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brian. I think it's a not an apples for apples comparison.
Yeah.
So some of the additional expenditure on external resources was for work that was not anticipated, mainly around the RPS.
Okay.
So when we say that it's 3.7 as opposed to 4.2, that's
Yes.
not a direct comparison.
Yes.
And you'll see when we move through to the results, the service level results, there were some things we didn't achieve this year due to vacancies. You can note them in the commentary on those that were either yellow or red. So it wasn't that we filled all vacancies with consultants and still delivered our whole work program. There were things that we didn't deliver
Yes.
due to vacancies, and even the issue with bringing in consultants, you've still got to have staff to procure them, brief them, monitor and have a look at the outputs and then finalize whatever that is. So it's not just, you still need the internal resource to properly manage those external resources to deliver the outputs. So it's not just a case of where we have a vacancy, we can contract somebody in and it fills 100% of that workload that may have been taken by that vacancy. So we still have some issues for the delivery of our overall work program due to not being able to fill our total FTE numbers. And that's just something we need to keep working on. And I think it's around the clear communication of the impact those vacancies are having on the plan. And that needs to happen through the quarterly reporting on our service levels and our work program.
Cool. And can I just follow that up, Tim? Like in terms of council performance measures, CE performance measures, do we have a green light, red light, amber light sort of scenario in terms of how we balance that, the number of employees, balance the external resources? Is there, because it seems to me we measure a lot of things that aren't really that important to me, or is something like that might be?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the reporting we do. I don't think you could just come up with a single report that balances those things. I think it's looking at the service level report and are we on track to deliver what we set ourselves to deliver an annual plan? Are we on track to stay within the budget that we've set? And then how are we looking in terms of filling the FTE quota that's been budgeted for? So all of those things together should paint a picture of whether we are delivering as the council has signed off to deliver. But there's no one measure you could come up with that pulls all of those things together in my mind.
Can I just add something to this? I mean, we've got an efficiency review that's underway at the moment with Bruce Robertson.
Yeah.
And I know that these are the sort of things that he's looking at in this review.
Oh, thank you.
Any further questions?
Just going back to your question about annual plan FTEs rather than emailing it. So had a look. So the number is 345 that compares to the 334 in this year's. But that 345 has an assumption about that there would be more staff by year end because the 345 is full-time equivalents in place over the whole year. So in fact, there would be 7 extra at the end of the year. So 352 by June next year.
Thanks. Is it normal to have other expenses detailed in a line item that is so exponentially higher than the other, of course, normal expenses that you would see in a statement of comprehensive revenue? The note breaks down the variance, but it leaves the other element as totally undescribed.
So the layout of this is the same as our annual report. So in the annual report, there is a note which details out the further expenditure, which is actually included. It summarizes, it breaks down what those other expenses are. We've always just put commentary around the variances in this Q4 report, but in the annual report, there is more detail in that other expenses note. From memory, there's I think it's about 9 lines that it's broken down to in the annual report note of different parts of that other expenses. But on a whole, in the statement of comprehensive revenue expenses, it is shown as 1 line.
It's so disproportionately different. No, it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a high-level report, which is basically a summary. There's lots of details, and I imagine your internal management reporting is breaking this stuff down in a lot more detail than we see. Okay, shall we move on? Have a look at the statement of financial position.
The statement of financial position just obviously details out our current assets, our non-current assets, current liabilities, and non-current liabilities. There's bullet points about the different variances. There's not, I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions on any of those variances, or do you want me to step through each of the lines? What would be your preference?
So which table?
Right.
What's the tables? Yeah.
Page 11.
Oh, page 11.
Oh, sorry, yeah, page 11, yeah.
Thank you.
Look, I think that this report is a report on the financial health of the organisation. We've got close to $1 billion worth of total assets recorded. I guess this time next year we might show $1 billion in that figure. But we have an equity ratio of 85%, which means there's only 25% debt in our total assets. And that is pretty much loans that we've made through to the port, my understanding. So perhaps you can just give us a little bit more detail around this financial structure that we're seeing in this report.
So in relation to the borrowings, council does have some of our own debt with the LGFA. So we have I'm just going to round it up, 25 million in loans with the LGFA at 30 June. That is really to fund our operating cash flow. So we have some reserves which are in deficit. Because those reserves are in deficit, obviously we've in effect used cash flow, which we haven't yet earned from those targeted rates. So there are various flood schemes, the transport reserve, for example, which is a negative, that needs to be cash flowed. Obviously, we've spent money on doing capital expenditure. We've spent money on the bus hub, for example, in the transport reserve. That needed to be cash flowed. That is in effect what council's debt is with the LGFA. So funding those projects which are to be recovered over the life of those assets. So they'll be recovered through the targeted rates on a almost straight line basis, so that the rates don't receive a very large peak when we made the bus hub and then obviously drop back down. And those assets are being used, paid for over the life of them. So over the life of the people that are receiving the benefit from those assets, as opposed to the people who obviously held the properties with those targeted rates when they were made. So the rest of the borrowing is on lent to Port Otago Limited. We hold the related party loan, Port Otago, so that's 125 million. That is the receivable, which is the balance which Port Otago owes us. We have the related party loan as non-current, and the borrowings are split current and non-current, which is just based on the contracts that we hold with LGFA on when they will mature. Otherwise, our largest asset is Port Otago Limited. That has not been revalued in these preliminary statement of financial position. So it's just held at its value that we had at 30 June. That valuation will come in for the annual report. We also have, as I said, property, plant and equipment. The largest thing that has been removed from property, plant and equipment in the current year is the 3.3 million for Birch Kitchener land. So that has been reclassified at 30 June into assets held for sale. So assets held for sale are for assets which we intend to sell within the next 12 months. So council had made that decision that sale was to go through, which is why it's being removed from PPE and put up into that line as a current asset to be disposed of in the next 12, well, disposed of sounds terrible, sold in the next 12 months. Otherwise, the other financial assets is our managed fund. You will see in the Treasury report at the end of the Treasury page at the end of this, it provides an outline of the interest, the dividends and the market value that we had in our managed fund. That is the JB Ware managed fund. Otherwise, is there any other questions on any of those line items?
The simple way to look at it is, as you said, there's almost $1 billion in assets. You've got 700,000 for the port shares and another 700 million and another 125 million in loans on lent to them. So that's 825 million of the billion is actually port related. The core assets and balance sheet for us as council is effectively 175 million.
And would it be fair to say that in I think your initial statements, Mr. Chairman, there would need to be quite a degree of caution around those, because what we are yet to see is the revaluations, and because of the dynamicness of the port's activity and the property movement across a year, like this is really, these numbers are a year ago, that could change substantially.
I think the risk, I mean, that you can probably answer this, but I think the risk of a devaluation of the port is fairly small. The revaluation is more likely, isn't it, with port assets?
Yeah, well, the port has two pieces to it. Obviously, it's got port operations and Chalmers. Property values, actually the last 2 years of revaluations, the increase in the value of the port has been driven by increases in property values. Those have flattened, so we don't expect that. But that's the great thing about the port business, because it's got those two parts to it. Over the last couple of years, when property values have increased the valuation substantially, the port operations itself has been staying fairly static. But this year, it's looking like it'll flip around, where the property values will be fairly flat, but port operations has jumped back up with cruise coming back. And the other thing is, even though it's property, it's not residential property. So they're in a completely different market that, while they're certainly not going to see the revaluation gains that they have in the last couple of years, I'm not expecting it to go backwards, or if it did decrease, it shouldn't be material.
But what we often see with the port is that they are midway through a quite substantial project with commercial and industrial, which then in an end result in a financial year has them embedding a new tenant into a newly owned building with a long-term tenancy. So then suddenly the value was realised of that investment, whereas it hasn't been realised while it's been in the project phase.
Yeah, so all of that gets factored in, but fundamentally, the Chalmers property side of the port is valued on a net asset basis. So you're right that that they can go along, and then when they get the asset come to the point where they can actually either sell it or more importantly to turn it into a rental, then they can get an uplift from that, even if the market values are decreasing. But as I said, not expecting really much movement in the Chalmers part, side of the port valuation.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
I just find it interesting, wow, we've got approximately $1 billion of assets. Our expenditure every year is roughly, in the environmental game, is roughly 10% of that. And when we haggle over, say, the eco fund, and at that last long-term plans discussion, we're saying, wow, let's give it up to $1 million. That's actually still only 0.1% of our total assets. If all we ever did was put money into the eco fund, then that would keep us going for 1,000 years.
That's a good point, Brian.
Just remember, cash is king.
I'm just saying.
It's not really a true point though, is it? Because the port is an asset. It's sitting there generating revenue. And then our trading income is what it costs to operate council. So it's what it costs to run our business. So then if we look to chip away at the port, at our asset, in that length of time, it'll all be gone. And in the interim, every what you're getting every year will just diminish year by year by year.
Yeah, it's been pointed out to me that we're actually getting into discussion here.
Is it?
Yeah, well, yes.
Sorry.
And that's
So,
what we started going.
thank you, Gary, for your clarification as well.
I'll stop now.
Shall we, but there's just another, I guess, in terms of the audit of this information, how's that progressing, and when are you likely to see it completed?
So this is
Are there any points that are coming out of it?
Yeah, so this is the second week of the audit. The auditors were here last week and they are here this week and at least next week, and then we kind of have a half week the week after. They haven't found anything material that would need to be reported. Obviously, these don't have the valuations in them, so there will be changes from these prelim figures for the valuations, but so far they haven't found any errors or anything that would need to be adjusted.
Andrew.
Now that you've just mentioned the audit process, and I noted in the pushback from Waitaki District about the charges that the audit process incurs. And I did note in that article that there is a period of time where you've got to obviously start early if you're going to justify a pushback on the charges. So I'm anticipating you'd want to raise this well in advance. So the question is, do you think we get good value from audit in the audit process? Is it value for money in your view?
Well, it's a, you know.
I know it's mandatory.
Yeah, the audit is the audit. We actually, this has been through the last, we discussed the audit fee at the last audit and risk meeting. So potentially, you know, Tim might want to comment, but our audit fee is increasing. Our audit fee, as that article would have pointed out, audit fees across the whole country, everybody's got uplifts, and ours is no different than everybody else's. It reflects, they go through a process with the Auditor General. They're benchmarking everybody. The Auditor General is the auditor for everybody, so they effectively set it for everybody with all the providers, whether it's you know, like we've got Deloitte or Audit New Zealand. And then we look at, you know, looking at where we sit. It's all based on the amount of work and the complexity and the number of hours that they've got to do. They look at the number of hours that they've done on the previous audits. Part of that increase is reflective of the fact that until this increase, those audit fees were set 3 years ago effectively. So there is a catch-up element of that. So they base it on the number of hours they've been doing, and that, you know, there's more complexity and more time involved in these audits, and they're not recovering their costs. So that's probably the simple answer. Whether Tim's got anything else to add?
No, I've got no comment to make on audit fees.
On that
Richard,
one, just noting that at the LGNZ conference there was actually a remit on audit fees as well. So yeah, as you said, it's a national issue, and so as a result of it being a successful remit, it'll be pushed nationally as an issue as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. No further questions?
Just before we move off the statement of financial position, I just want to draw your attention to, I've really had a terrible typing with this. Total assets, I have typed 966669 and it's 996669. So everything else actually, it does actually, I do all the variances and all of the commentary on the Excel, so it is
So
just literally.
If we were to total this up with a calculator.
If you were to total up the non-current, the current assets and the non-current assets, it would be 996, not 966.
That's a very good confession to
We've
make.
got more than I thought.
Sorry?
I don't think you noticed that. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hence the reason I'm putting it into Keystone, because I can't type.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
What happens to CV2
All of the individual lines are correct and all of the variance lines are correct.
Yep.
The next part of the paper is the activity financial report for 30 June. So this is our revenue expenses and the surplus deficit compared to the annual plan for each of our activity levels that we have in the annual report. So we have regional leadership, environment, safety and resilience, and transport. So this also includes both operating and capital. So if you're looking to compare this to the statement of revenue and expenses, it obviously that is just operating. It doesn't include capital expenditure. This report includes both. Behind that report is the revenue
Just
variances.
Before we move off that, just it's important to note that the overall variance is $112,000, which is fairly insignificant really in terms of the variance, but that's spread over the activity centres, which have larger variances and various other things in them. So I mean, all in all, it squares up with the plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, the big difference between this and the SCREE is that this has CapEx in it as well. So it includes total spend and in there. So that's what you're seeing there is obviously with the SCREE being slightly worse, it means that, you know, we're slightly better in CapEx, or whether you say better, we're underspent in our CapEx program, and that's offsetting the OpEx overspend.
The next part of the report is the variance tables that I make for the variances of over 100,000 for revenue. That is broken down in the program level under each of the activities. So that is done for both revenue and expenses, with a comment describing what's really kind of causing those variances, whether they're permanent or potentially just a timing issue in relation to when we've been able to do the work. Does anyone have any questions on any of those?
Any questions?
Yeah, just it's been pointed out already, but yeah, in the first one, regional leadership on the consent and compliance budgeting, and just yeah, might be an issue for our council to think about as we go forward in LTP and budgeting, if it's a budgeting issue that we can address. So I guess it's a question about why are we not reaching our budget figures.
Yeah, so it's probably similar to the discussion we had to Kevin's question previously. So there's a number of factors that have led to that result this year, and we have, as Kevin pointed out, it's been a few years on the bounce that we've had budgeting challenges in that regulatory space. So hopefully we'll see better results for this year that we've just kicked off, and well, I'm sure we will with some of the changes that were made. And then there's obviously just a process for us to go through long-term plan for council to give some good guidance about how much time is spent in that non-cost recoverable area, so we can make sure that's accurately reflected when we budget.
Another one that stood out was 508 and reduced expenditure on catchment management. 508,000. I'm sorry, I wrote
Are
it
you on
down.
expenditure rather than revenue?
Oh,
That's
sorry, am I
expenditure.
looking at that? Yes, I jumped onto expenditure. Sorry, Kate, that's right.
So what page are we on?
Sorry.
Page 16.
Yeah, 13 and then 14,
Yeah,
15,
no,
16.
you're right.
I would like to just draw your attention to, because this has been an issue that you've discussed in the past, the Alexandra flood protection and the fees from Contact Energy. So I wasn't sure. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that that agreement has been finalised and that revenue has been recognised in the current year.
Okay.
Well, I didn't want to know that, but just, do you know if it's a long-term agreement or is it just 1 year?
I would have to.
I think that at the moment they've just sorted out this current year, but that sets the platform for how they will now just tidy up the agreement long term. Yep.
There's an expectation that we lock in an agreement for a period of years and we're not negotiating year on year, which is hugely inefficient for both parties, not just us, but for Contact as well. So I know Michelle's getting that memorandum sorted.
Thank you. I have another question on the Lower Clutha, and it's great to see that, I mean, the variance there is the extra money. That we were budgeting on money from the climate resilience programs, but this was an overspend and we managed to move money from another pot. Does that mean that that 261,000 goes off a different pot somewhere else?
Some of that is, so some of it is the climate resilience and some of it is actually repairs that came through from NEMA in relation to actually repairing some of the flood bank. So it is two pots together in that variance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, just on the environment under variance with biosecurity, I was just wondering if I was missing something or it was
Page is that?
14. So the biosecurity variance, the actual revenue is higher than the AP. the explanation is about a reduction.
So the first 2 points are a reduction, and the last one is the 662 increase in grant revenue for Wilding Pines. So you'll see that matches the comment in relation to the other expenses, that where it was higher than what we expended on from what we expected on contractors. So that grant money is received from MPI, and then we pay contractors to go out and remove those trees. So this is the revenue side of that increase, and then we do have a couple of decreases which make the 407.
Yeah.
Just briefly, through you, Tim. So basically, so you're getting the grant income in prior to doing the work.
We do. So we the grant income comes in, I'm going to say roughly about September. It varies from year to year. So we receive what our funding will be. They have very set areas that they would like us to focus on. Those areas, and then of course we perform that work. We have to report back to them, and that grant funding is obviously either allowed to be kept, or we do need to. There's sometimes a negotiation where we can roll it into the next period if it's a timing issue. There are weather restrictions on that type of work. You know, it can be quite dangerous on the side of a hillside, so sometimes there are weather restrictions that mean that we can't perform all of the work before 30 June. But if we have not negotiated, then we do need to pay that money back to MPI. But this year we have spent all of our money, so that grant funding has been matched with expenditure.
Can I just going back to page 13, which is the activity report, just looking at the variances from the safety and resilience, they're positive by $3.2 million. And I know you've gone through and identified where the expenditure is a lot lower than what had been planned. That seems to indicate to me that there's perhaps work not being done in this area. And when you look through those, the expenditure variances in terms of the safety and resilience, you know, work not carried out, reduced staff time, all those sort of questions. So I guess the broader question around this is why isn't this work being done?
I don't, well, there, if you, so you're on page 17.
Yep.
Yep. So and you, all the safety and resilient ones, that's, you know, that's questions for those activities. I mean,
yep.
You know, we're reporting the numbers that have or haven't been spent.
It might be.
Yep.
Gavin. Yeah.
Yes, it was primarily in the natural hazards area due to the time it took to recruit vacant roles, and the assumption was we would have those vacancies filled earlier than we did, and a combination of probably optimistic planning around how long it would take to fill roles combined with the hot labour market has meant that we just haven't had the people to deliver the program in that year. But we've now caught up, we've filled most of our roles, and so we're in a much better position now for the current year.
Okay. So we could sort of tie that variance in with the screen and employee costs. Okay. Yep. Thank you, Kevin. Any further questions? Or
Yeah, probably just carrying on from that on page 17. So there is just on $3 million there of that hasn't been spent. So where does that where is that money? Where is it sitting?
So most of those activities, if you look at the from emergency management down, all of those activities have reserves. So if we'd rated for that and it hasn't happened, it sits in that reserve. And when you actually get to, and we'll look at the LTP and rating levels, you know, one of the things of where the reserves are starting from a positive position will, you know, allow you to think about the level of rates that get set going forward. Natural hazards, the flood and low flow and climate change adaptation are all general rate funded. So they will then effectively go into the general reserve. But you know, that if you like gets offset by other overspends that also end up being funded by the general reserve as well.
So probably Dr. Palmer, that the capital projects and the likes are now, you're comfortable that they're back on track to being completed?
Yes, I'm comfortable with,
Yeah.
these are timing issues. Of course, the baseline is an estimate prepared sometimes up to 18 months prior as to how a project will pan out. And then when we go to tender and get the actual cost and then start to deliver it, there are naturally some variances between what's planned and what actually happens. But I'm comfortable with the capital program overall.
Thank you.
Sorry, I shouldn't have second guessed myself before. It is expenditure variance, and it's W3 on page 16, which says 508,000 decreased expenditure in catchment management. Why is that? Might be staff.
I can help you if you like,
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman. Most of that will be due to an assumption we would have extra staff working on the integrated catchment management program.
Yeah. Well, it might be.
That'll be part of it.
It is part of it, yes. Much of it.
Most.
Most of it will be most of it.
Thank you.
Okay, should we progress? Brian, yep.
I just found it really interesting, you know, I'm obviously not taking some of the public transport information in as well as I should, but the fact that the revenue for PT Dunedin is only twice that of what Wakatipu is. I just found that interesting, like when you compare the passenger numbers in Queenstown and Dunedin, it, you know, reflects that doubling. Queenstown's 1.3 million, Dunedin's 2.8 million. But like when you compare the populations, the actual permanent populations, Dunedin's actually 8 times. It's obviously reflective of that tourism industry. It's interesting. Like we have a tourism industry here as well. Are we not making the most of our airport buses, for example?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brian, but I don't see a question in there. That's another point that you've made.
It's just interesting. When we look at these numbers, it's just interesting.
Recognising our tourism industry.
Yeah, I think we'll note that. And yeah, and Pim, you've got your hand up. And you're in a car somewhere.
Yes, thanks, Tim. I'm at Nelson Airport waiting for my daughter to arrive, but I'll pretend that was a question from Brian. So look, mostly people don't realise that we've actually got a much more significant bus service in Queenstown than most people realise, and I think we've got about 70 buses in Dunedin and about 30 or maybe even 35 in Queenstown. So you're right, Brian, we've actually got a significant public transport service in Queenstown, and by head of population significantly bigger than we do in Dunedin.
Okay.
Can I just ask a quick question through you, Mr. Chair, just on the fact of saying the catchment one. So I've got the Lake Hayes remediation program being delayed, but can I just ask, are they Lake Tuakapoto and Tomahawk Lagoon ones, are they tracking on budget?
I would need to confirm that, but my understanding is yes, we're comfortable with where those are going. They don't have the same level of expenditure as Lake Hayes, which involves significant capital expenditure. There's none of that sort of expenditure in those. They're an order of magnitude less.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Sarah, can you carry on?
So if everybody's comfortable, I'll move on to the treasury part of the, oh, sorry. No, I'll hand over to Mike to go through the performance measures.
Sorry, I've got one more on the, I didn't realise, sorry. Just before you go. So on page 18, public transport Dunedin. So I think, are we still on budget to have a deficit in their reserve? That sounds a bit nothing, a deficit reserve of $9 odd million. That's in our 23 plan, or is that in, have we gone up another 2 million from that?
I would need to go and have a look at what the reserve position is at 30 June this year. There were quite a few things that came in at 30 June. So we had the CPIs for the transport companies. So that is a quarter end as part of the transport contracts. They're obviously made in advance over an 8 or 10 year period. They have CPIs in them for changes in fuel, etc. So I'm not 100% sure on where the reserve was at 30 June. But I would expect that it was more than what we had budgeted, the deficit.
Right. So,
But to what extreme it is, I'm uncertain of the exact numbers.
so is this one of the budgets sitting, let's say it's sitting at $10 million, or it's getting close to $10 million in deficit? Is that one of the reserves that we are flatlining or trying to flatten out any increase to repay it back, or where do we? How do we recoup that $10 million with the talks that we have been having on increasing services and getting less revenue? So it's already at $10 million.
That was, so if you remember back for the LTP, that was the plan that we had, was that rates, transport rates were increasing, fairly steadily, and but still increasing. I think if you look, last year was still, more than 10, probably closer to 20%, and they have been year on year. But we were still peaking sort of at year 4 or year 5 for both of the networks with the maximum deficit, by which time, the view was that we would hopefully turn and the rates would continue, albeit the increases were less from there, and the deficits would there'd be more to pay the deficits back. But what we've seen, over the last 3 years is that was our assumptions back, when we did the LTP. So this is what we've got to look at when we do this next LTP, is what are our assumptions, because of course what we've seen over the last couple of years is the costs have escalated well ahead of what we assumed when we did those LTP estimates. But you are seeing also offsetting that, we do some of that, particularly when it's CPI related and everything. It means our claims from Waka Kotahi go up. So it doesn't all sit with the, with the targeted ratepayer.
Yes.
But there's also been, far different assumptions around levels of fare revenue, etc. So, there's a lot for us to look at. When you get the annual report, that does have, obviously all the reserves balances are included in that. We just don't include it for this report here. There's still some, there'll be some adjustments and stuff that we're still working through at this point. But for the annual report, it's listed there, and then obviously that's the number that we start the LTP discussions from.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
So I'll hand over to Mike to go through the performance measures.
Thanks, Sarah. Look, just like the financials, the non-financials are subject to the external audit. So what you're seeing in terms of the traffic lights is the provisional result. Fair to say that staff have been hard on themselves, and in terms of the colours that they're landing on, and I'll touch on some of that. I'll take you through it, with a view to having that conversation with audit, to kind of potentially bring some of these back to a more favourable result. We always start out a bit, a bit tough on ourselves, and audit come in. It's a bit of a game we have going on. But, so I'm hopeful that the result, actually, the final result, I'll step you through that and you'll see what I mean. With the nod of the chair, I'd suggest you just start around page 32. We just look at the table. It gives you that oversight around what has changed from quarter 3. So if you get down to page 32 in the agenda, and you're looking at the first one there, and this is the regional leadership group of activity, and looking at governance and community engagement, the first one. From what we previously reported in quarter 3, there's been one change from yellow to red, and that's our greenhouse gas inventory work, and that's an example where we have been tough on ourselves. The work has been achieved, and we just missed that 30 June date. So we could expect audit to look at that favourably and say, yeah, it's okay to report publicly a yellow on that one. And also to add, in the annual report, you'll see a favourable narrative around that as well. So just some context there. The annual report provides a bit more of a story around this that audit looks at quite closely. So jumping down into, so sorry, any questions on that one? No? So quickly jumping down into regional planning. One change there from yellow to red, and that's our draft regional urban development strategy. I recall the GM back in Q3 reporting did indicate that that probably should have been read at Q3. So there's really, that was well flagged. And jumping down to regulatory, no change there. It's all greens. Then moving down into page 33, looking at the environment group, land and water. You've got three changes there. The first one around implementing the freshwater estuarine environment monitoring programs, and the one below it around the OCC is supported to meet deliverables. Both yellow to green. I think there was some uncertainty around whether the reporting target was going to be met, and they clearly were. So that's all that is. And then moving down to that, the yellow to red, the catchment planning. That's probably another example. We've been possibly a little hard on ourselves. As you're probably aware, some good work has been achieved throughout the financial year. It's probably more likely to land on the yellow following conversation with external audit. Jumping down into biodiversity, biosecurity. You've got two changes there from green to yellow. One is the BAP, the Biodiversity Action Plan. We have had just some detail around that one. It's yellow because we've had 5 out of our 8 identified actions achieved. And with the context that 3 of those are actually being revised, and you're probably more over that than I am in terms of reporting through to your committees. And then dropping down into the BOP, the Biosecurity Operational Plan, bit of detail around that, green to yellow, 62% the actions completed and 37 partially completed, with many of those partial substantially completed. So it's actually not a bad result.
Mike, just in regards to the colour shifts, I mean, council, when they see a green, have a level of comfort when they see that report in one quarter, and then the next quarter when it changes, it goes backwards. It seems to be there's a bit of inconsistency in perhaps the structure of the reporting or the thinking around that. It's a bit surprising to see things going backwards as opposed to improving. It's probably not, it's a question for the organisation, probably not just you. But,
we certainly, I acknowledge that, and we're certainly trying to manage a no surprises approach here. So yeah, we're going to look at these things carefully around why that might happen, and some of it's around education.
And we are seeing this report coming through more now in the CE report, so give a lot more attention perhaps.
Some of the targets in the annual report, from having a look at them, they're only just not met. So it could have been in Q3 that we definitely had the intention and it was on target to be green. But if it's not met, it does need to flick into that orange or red. So it may have been, and I know that a lot of those targets that have flipped, that at Q3, it definitely looked like we were going to make it there by 30 June. But perhaps one of the activities didn't get done, or one of the measures out of a big range.
Just probably, I will make it a question. I suppose the key to that is us being flagged of any imminent changes that are coming up. Where this is quarterly, but if we at the appropriate committee, if we were given a heads up that we're 2 staff down, or there's a contract that can't be done because of such and such, and then we see it in this quarter, it's actually no surprise because it's getting that early notification.
Well, going forward, you see basically this that you're looking at is being attached to the CE report. So you will get that monthly, what the updated indicator is, so that if it changes from green, and we've started with everything green, so as soon as something changes and on any month, you will get it basically the next month in the CE report.
Any further questions? Mike, let you carry on.
So moving into page 34, looking at the safety and resilience group. There are no changes from quarter 3, so you're looking at the same results flowing through for year end. Subject to the external audit, but we're not expecting any surprises from our conversations with audit. And then you've got your final group of activity, which is your transport on page 35. And you've got a couple of shifts there with your percentage of scheduled services, reliability, landing on green for year end, and scheduled services online. That's a punctuality measure, and that's shifted to yellow.
We'll just pause you there, Mike. Kevin.
Oh, yeah, look, sorry, Mike, just to go back one on 34, a bit of an explanation around flood protection and drainage, where we've got 2 lots in the red, and that's around getting back to communicating back to landholders and getting things underway, where we're not performing at the level that we should. Are there any significant ones that we have concerns over, and how are we progressing to fix that?
I think off memory, I'm just recalling the detail around this. This is an example where the traffic light's very blunt. It's actually, and then also the target is really high, 100%, and you'll actually see the actual result is quite high. It's up in the 90s. So there's been a very small number where we haven't communicated as the measure suggests, the target suggests.
Good point, Mike, and I think it speaks. It speaks a little bit to the amount of information we share. Sometimes not being enough, because the other one that's sort of this is the Laboima response, where it's 100%. It's either green or it's red, and there's nothing else. So what we need to do is explain this is red, but it might be 99.9%. We've missed one for a reason, and we can explain that. So this speaks a little bit to the level of detail, not just to say it's a failure, but what has happened, and is it a systemic failure that we need to do something about as an organisation, or is it just something that's tripped us up that we're confident wouldn't happen in an ordinary course of events? So there's some lessons for us to take there, just in terms of how we report.
Because that could simply be an effect that Landover is away for 2 months, and we haven't been able to get them.
So, and just on that point,
do you want to just add? Do you know anything about this one?
Yeah, look, it's about the communication side of it, and you're right. We might have got 100% within 21 days, but the target's 20 days, and we've failed. We need a more sophisticated set of targets, which might be something like 80% in 20 days and 100% within 30 days. So to reflect how it actually works. And part of it's also been our information systems. For some of them, we haven't been able to confirm that we communicated in time, so we've been very conservative and said, look, we can't prove we have, then we'll assume we haven't. And we're making it.
Which is the way the audit works. If we can't sit down and satisfy them through our data that we've met it, then it's not.
And we are also in the annual report this year, there's been a change to the statement of service performance standards. So we're required, we have always had a description of why we perhaps haven't made those targets, but we're also required to put commentary in around our judgment. So that will have a bit more commentary, potentially to what we've had from previous years on some of those points in the annual report.
Thank you.
So can I just ask who sets the targets?
Yep, the council set the targets through the annual plan and long-term plan process. So when Gavin talked to thinking about that, that's a real key consideration for the council through this long-term plan process. And Mike will do a lot of work with managers around our thoughts on what represents good service levels to speak to the work program that we sign up to. But this table also needs to be satisfied that they're giving you the assurance. So we've got, they're set now for this year, and they were attached yesterday, and we'll keep reporting on those, but there's some work to do next year to have a look at some of these and how we set them up.
And just a little plug for the audit fee. No, it isn't really, but Richard's point around assurance to you around, say, a systemic issue. If there was something related to something coming out of a red in here, you would most likely see that come through your audit report, your management audit report. Yeah. Yeah. It certainly should.
Very good. Okay. Should we roll on?
Yeah. So yeah, I was just so page 35, Transport Group. I was just signaling a couple of changes there. Your reliability measure and your punctuality measures. Reliability landing on green, and for punctuality 5 minutes, around 5 minutes landing on yellow. I believe that's a good news result apparently with year that we've had. So Transport might want to talk about that a wee bit.
Okay, so we've come to the end of the quarterly performance measure report. So yeah,
Lorraine made a comment with regards to transport measures, maybe.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
In terms of the result, I just wondered, Mike just mentioned maybe transport may have a comment, and Lorraine's with us, and I was just checking that she may have something to say.
Lorraine, I'll give you the opportunity if you'd like to make a comment on that.
No, I didn't really just answer any questions, don't have any specific comments, but I have questions.
Sorry, I'm happy to make a comment. Look, I think we all realise public transport had a very difficult 12 months, incredibly difficult 12 months, dealing with driver shortages and missed trips and not being able to fulfil contractual obligations that we had in terms of our relationships with our operators. So the fact that we've ended up with these results, in my view, is actually remarkable. And I think everyone around this council table recognises that this was a national issue that we struggled with. And my view is that ORC, and particularly in Dunedin and Queenstown, actually performed better than anywhere else in New Zealand. So it's only this week, I think, that Wellington's gone back to a full timetable of services for their bus transport systems. We were able to achieve that on the 1st of February in Dunedin. That was a commitment that I made both to you, but also to the general public. And weren't able to achieve that in Queenstown, but we were able to get back on the 1st of June with very few missed trips, actually, which is one of the reasons that last measure has gone from yellow to green. So look, it's been an extraordinarily difficult year for transport, and remarkably really thrilled with these results, and just want to congratulate the whole team.
Okay, thanks, Mike, for that. Should we head back to the Treasury report? Sarah?
Yes.
Oh, did we have a question?
No, I was just going to move the recommendation.
So
I think we'll do that.
Oh no, we've just got a couple more parts. And sorry, I actually need to blow my nose. I was going to excuse myself. But the Treasury report outlines. So there's a graph there with our cash flow, which shows our, I suppose, our on-call cash and our term deposits. There's also a graph which shows our managed fund portfolio. There is a table of our portfolio performance. So that has Q1 to 4 of our interest, dividends, other and market value movements in our managed fund. You will see that the managed fund does go up and down at the moment. That is just really the volatility in the share market that's still going on post-COVID. And then there is the asset class allocation, which is this our compliance with our SIPO for the managed fund. Questions on any of that?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Regarding those managed funds, where are we on our decision making around ethical investments?
Yeah, reports coming back to audit and risk next month. So the action there was to go away, do a report to audit and risk with some options based on the workshop presentation that JB Ware had done. So I'd emailed them the other day about where we're at with that, and so that report will be coming next month.
Oh, no.
Right, no further questions. That's good. Was there any commentary to be made on the detailed activities report. Well, we've summarised that, haven't we? So sort of covered off, isn't it?
Yeah. So the activity detail report just has the revenue and expenses split down with operating and capital expenditure. Thank you. Sorry. I was about to say, can I just get up and blow my nose? Sorry. Yeah, so and then it has where that is funded from. So the sources of funding. So whether that's general reserve, targeted reserves, or other reserves for each of the programs. So it's just a very much more detail of what's been previously shown in some of the tables earlier. If anyone has any questions on it.
Are there any concerns with deficits being carried forward?
Oh, sorry, it's page 20. Not page 20.
Nothing more than usual. I mean, the deficits for underspends, in the target rate areas gets retained in those reserves, and when work happens, obviously the funding's already there. That's fairly standard. The general reserve and the extra that gets used there, that's the bit that obviously is, there isn't if you like, a carry forward, or where that's whatever's come out of that, the extra coming out of the general reserve wasn't funded in the year we've just had, and obviously it isn't forecast to be funded in the annual plan year that we're just moving into. So that's always been the issue with with any additional deficit, is that when it ends up there, we're just chipping into our general reserves.
Yeah, I think we've got to the end of the agenda. So we have got the recommendation that's come through. I think, Kevin.
Happy to move.
Yep. Okay. So let's get there. Okay, the recommendations that we note the reports and the activity and financial performance reports for the period 1st of July through to 30th of June 23. So you've moved, Gary seconded. All those in favour?
Just talk you
want to talk to them?
Yeah. Specifically do. Look, where we see it, I actually never get fearful when we see a red mark, providing that we know that this organisation is heading and trying to achieve very high standards, and that's why we're often getting tipped up at the very top. So I think it's critical that we keep those high standards and those high expectations, but for governance to be able to support staff in the best way, we need that pre-warning that there may be something about to be tipped up. So I'd like to see those levels kept high and us continually striving for that, but just that reporting so we can give greater support at the right time. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, and thanks very much for the report. It's very good and very clear to follow. Thank you.
Okay, well, no other general business. We can close. Oh, we did. We had okay, now we'll go back to that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Great. Let's tick that one off. Right. I'll just like to close with karakia then. Kia tautia rangamaria, kia ranga I ngā iwi o te au. Oh, thank you.
Sorry.